This UCSD TV program is a presentation of University of California Television for educational and non-commercial use only.
We all strive to live a long, prosperous, and healthy life. With advances in health and medical sciences, this goal is ever more attainable. The Sam and Rose Stein Institute for Research on Aging is a non-profit organized research unit under the auspices of the University of California at San Diego, committed to advancing lifelong health and independence through research, education, and patient care. To better empower and improve the lives of young and old alike, the Stein Institute presents the following program.
It is now my pleasure and privilege to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Elizabeth Barrett Connor. Dr. Barrett Connor is Distinguished Professor and Chief of the Division of Epidemiology in the Department of Family and Preventive Medicine here at UCSD. Dr. Barrett Connor is a founder and director of the Rancho Bernardo Heart and Chronic Disease Study, which started in 1972. She is truly a pioneer in the field of aging. It is because of her that San Diego was put on the international map in terms of geriatrics and gerontology. Dr. Barrett Connor is a member of the Institute of Medicine. She has authored more than 850 publications. She's the only person I know of who received the NIH Merit Award 4 times. It is difficult to get it once, let alone 4 times. A couple of years ago, she was selected by the National Osteoporosis Foundation as Legends of Osteoporosis Lecturer. There are not too many people who can be called legends in their own lifetime, but Dr. Barrett Connor is one of those, and it's really a pleasure and a privilege to have her give us a talk. She'll be talking about women's health from A to Z. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Barrett Connor.
Well, that was a very nice introduction. What you can tell that is I'm obviously old enough to talk about this now. When I started the Rancho Bernardo study, I was 35 years old. I told my boss that I wanted to study people over the age of 50. He raised both eyebrows and said, "We'll see about that." So I'm now almost as old as my population, but they're a little older than I am. So we're steadily going on together, and since 1972, I now have, out of an original cohort of 6,000 people, there are 1,800 still living and well, not institutionalized people in Rancho Bernardo. Some of them undoubtedly benefited by being in a study, because the one thing I want to say to you is, if you're worried about your health, get in a study. It's amazing how healthy you are when you're in a study. Even if you're in the control group, we calculate the expected number of events, then we assign you to a treatment, and then you never have the expected number of events. It's the kind of people who join studies, or is it the fact that you get to see a healthcare provider, maybe not to do anything but just say, "Are you taking your pills?" But it's really good for you to be in a study. So see if you can find one. All right. Well, the men will want to know that I will mention them. It's not mostly about women, but it is mostly about women. But a lot of things I will say, except for the cut points, are largely bisex, equal opportunity education. And I'm not going to say anything that you don't really know. I'm sure everyone in this room, because you're here, is probably quite educated. So it's kind of my personal belief about what I would say if I could talk to everybody. So I'm just going to go through the alphabet. These are very arbitrary alphabets, but the alphabet's not arbitrary. The content is. So my A is for apple, and an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and that may have been a good statement, because it's important that you eat fruits and vegetables, as you all know, and it's probably not such a bad idea to see your doctor. This phrase, "keeps the doctor away," has kind of a potential to be misinterpreted, because, in fact, you do want to see your doctor, but you don't want to see your doctor because you're sick. You want to see your doctor so you can get the best advice on how to stay well and what you can do to stay healthy. So starting out with A, then we go to breakfast. Breakfast is not a cup of coffee. Breakfast is food. And breakfast is really important. If you think about it from the evolutionary point of view, ancient man was accustomed to eating food when he or she could get it. So they would have little nibbles of whatever they found along the road, and if they got a small animal, they would cook it when they got it because they had no way to keep it, and if they got a big animal, they would eat a lot of meat until it was rotten, and then they would go on and do whatever they did next. So we evolved from a species that ate meat, but not very often. The meat that we ate was lean because the animals had to run away from bigger animals, so they had to be pretty fast. And we ate when we could. So now we're in a society where if you watch TV until 10 o'clock and then you go to bed and you don't get up until 10 o'clock, your body hasn't had any food in it all night long, and your brain is saying, what's wrong here? I better save some of those next calories I get and put them on my body because there might not be any food coming. So it's very important that you eat breakfast, and then you won't be hungry all day, and you won't be binge eating all day, and you won't be going home and looking in the refrigerator for the salad you were going to have and noticing, strangely enough, there's a cake in there. So you just need to think about eating. And you know, if any of you have ever been to Weight Watchers, that's one of their mantras. They give a certain amount of food, and you're supposed to divide it up. Now, if you eat 6 times a day, and I'm not talking about the same number of calories, but if you divide your food into 6 meals a day, it improves all the heart disease risk factors. It's just amazing. It's good for your cholesterol, it's good for your blood sugar, it's good for your blood pressure. This is a study that was done by a former postdoc of mine who's in England, and she had a 24-hour, 7-day food diary. Most of us don't have that kind of diet data in almost 7,000 middle-aged adults who were followed for 7 years. The highest percent of the proportion of all the calories you ate during the day that were eaten at breakfast, you had the least weight gain. So I have a daughter who fights weight, and she doesn't want anything to eat until noon, and I can't shake that idea. She says, Mom, I have trouble with eating too much food all day long. I don't need to eat food when I'm not hungry. Well, that's a common mistake. So you need to think about that and try to get yourself up and find something that you like for breakfast. A healthy, a nice piece of fruit, a little yogurt. If you eat like the Europeans do, you can have a little piece of cheese. You can have whatever you want, but you have to have something that your body identifies as food, and that's not black coffee. C is for caffeine and chocolate. 2 of the formerly forbidden foods now turn out to be good for you. Caffeinated coffee, actually in I think 3 studies now, has been associated with less memory loss in old women. Doesn't seem to work in middle age, sorry, but when you get older, I don't know how that works, but there are 3 studies that showed that. Doesn't seem to work at men. I don't know what that is either. And it's associated with less diabetes in both men and women. So if you like a couple of cups of coffee a day, that's good. Now, remember, less is sometimes best. So when I say have something, I'll go right into the chocolate talk. You should have chocolate. But how much chocolate? I know that I personally could eat an entire bar of my favorite brand. I try not to mention brands on the media, but I could eat an entire bar on the bus on the way home and hope they didn't catch me eating it. But I don't do that. The best chocolate is fortunately expensive, so that's one incentive not to eat it all the time. Very dark chocolate, which has less milk and more cacao, is really the healthy chocolate. And it has wonderful benefits. The best demonstrated in trials is blood pressure. It actually reduces your blood pressure. And most of us, as we get older, blood pressure goes up no matter what we do. So that's a good thing. Now, how do you know how much chocolate to eat? My daughter-in-law's mother is a chocolate addict, and she can't have chocolate in the house because she says if I have it there, she knows what kind of chocolate she likes. She likes really good chocolates, and she has a box here. She said, I'll eat it all in 2 days. What can I do? So my daughter-in-law, who's a very clever person, said to herself, my mother takes her medicines very carefully. So she got her mother one of those boxes that you probably have with your pills in them, and you have one for each day of the week. So she got a special box, and it's just big enough for 2 pieces of this really expensive chocolate. And she put one in each box, and she said, Mom, that's your prescription. You have to eat 2 pieces a day. Whether you want it or not, I don't care what time of the day you eat it, you can be fasting or not, but you must eat 2 pieces of chocolate a day, and it's worked miracles. That's all she wants. So sometimes you can fool yourself into thinking of it in some different way, that you can have your favorite food, not give it up. And it does seem that dark chocolate is good for you. D is for vitamin D, and I hardly think I can say anything new about vitamin D that you don't know. It is in every paper. It is presumed to prevent everything. This is what it says it does. It's good for bones, and it prevents falls. Of those things, maybe good for bones, maybe prevent falls. I think that's the strongest data we have. Reduces blood pressure in some studies, reduces the risk of diabetes. That actually seems to be true for type 1 and type 2 diabetes, which is quite interesting. Observational data, not clinical trials, but fairly strong. Bone loss, colon cancer is the only cancer that has been repeatedly associated with higher vitamin D levels. And normal people get 85% of their vitamin D from the sun. But we people have already got wrinkles, don't go out in the sun unless we're covered with sunscreen. And that means you get 15% of the amount of sun you would have gotten if you hadn't had the sunscreen. So what are you to do? You can go to a meeting like this and say what I just said with a lot of doctors, and all the dermatologists in the room will get up and walk away. They think I'm being just unethical. But you don't want to expose your face, because your faces and your hands are probably what got most of the sun in most of your life. That's where your wrinkles are. That's where you are less efficient at making vitamin D out of the sun, because you have to have dense skin like you may have up here, but what you don't have anymore. I didn't used to demonstrate crepe, but now I do. If you have that, you cannot make vitamin D in that part of your body. And you don't want it on your face. You don't want skin cancers and stuff on your face. So expose some other body part. You know, you can find another body part in your own backyard if you're running out of places. You have to have about that much sun exposed for 15 minutes on a part that has good skin, and that's all you need for the day. Now you can buy a bunch of pills. They don't make nearly as high a vitamin D level. Any of the pills you buy, even the big doses, will not create as high a vitamin D level as the sun does. And you also know you're getting the right kind of vitamin D. None of us knows what that is. There's 3 kinds of vitamin D, and the bottles all tell you this is 2 or 3, or this is 2 plus 3. We don't know anything. What we know is that what the body makes is what the body wants. The body's not stupid. So you were meant to get your vitamin D from the sun. You can afford a little sun. And if you're really worried, if you are a redheaded person or you've already had skin cancers, then you have to take quite a bit of vitamin D to do as well. So I'm a fan of less sunscreen. I always put it on my face when I remember. And I usually wear a baseball hat also, which is terribly attractive. I fit right in with all the other people on my bus. And then I try to get out, and you don't have to get it every day. You can get it once a week. You can get your little dose once a week. Take the grandbabies out or something. So my pitch for sun, but vitamin D is important. Now, we don't really know what things vitamin D does, and if you've been reading the paper lately, we don't even know what the correct dose is. But we think it's probably perfectly safe to have about 2,000 units, and most of your vitamin D bottles will have 200 to 400 units. So that may be, especially if you're an older person or you don't go in the sun at all, that might not be enough. So there's going to be a new trial now run by a lady out of Harvard who does what I call mail-order clinical trials. Some of you may have been in her aspirin trial. Some of you may have been in her Women's Health Initiative trial. You never see her. She sends the pills. You take them. You fill out the questionnaire. It's very clever because you can not see a whole lot of people and do a really big study fairly cheaply and very effectively. So her new trial now is an interesting trial. One treatment arm is vitamin D, and it is 4,000 units, and it is being given with calcium, because there's several papers now that suggest that vitamin D without calcium actually increases your risk of heart attack. I don't know how that works either, but that's been shown in, I think, 6 papers. So you don't want to take your vitamin D without calcium. So you can get calcium in that little pill bottle or any other way you like. It's hard to get enough calcium out of milk now, so now I'm recommending my first pill, I guess. But yeah, I think the point is that you want to get the optimal amount of vitamin D, and she wants to test it. And so she's going to have you take, if you get her active vitamin D pill, you will get, as I understand it, 2,000 units of vitamin D, and I believe it's 400 or 600, 400 milligrams, I think, of calcium. And then there will be a placebo group, and then there will be a group that gets omega-3 instead of vitamin D, and then really clever, there'll be a group that gets both. So everybody will take 2 pills. You won't know whether you're on a placebo, vitamin D, omega-3, or both. And I think it's a very clever design. They're going to get 20,000 women, and they think they're going to have an answer to every disease in 5 years. So I think it's quite exciting. This is the Framingham Offspring Study, and this is one of the studies where, and this is in Boston, so it's easy to live in Boston and be vitamin D deficient, especially in the wintertime. And they found that the people with a low vitamin D who also had high blood pressure when they started had a twofold higher risk of heart attack. So there may be some benefit there. I'm always a little bit nervous when they tell you about some subset that benefited, because it may mean that as a whole nobody benefited, but maybe they looked through the data and found, oh, there's a positive finding, we'll publish that. I don't know that, but I think I'm always a little nervous when something only works in some subset, because most people don't go out testing vitamin D just in people with hypertension. All right, E is for exercise, and you probably already know that you're supposed to walk 30 minutes 5 days a week or 10,000 steps. I don't know, have any of you used a pedometer recently? But when we were doing the diabetes prevention trial and we had all our participants exercising, the nurse and I decided we would get our own pedometers and see just how much exercise we got. And about third day, my little exercise thing broke. It must have been broke because I wasn't up but about 20 steps the entire day, 2 trips to the bathroom. That was all I did. Well, it wasn't broke. I had just been busy at the computer writing a grant and answering the phone, and I hadn't been anywhere. So you'd be surprised how sedentary you may be, even though you think you are not. So you always remember the basic rules. Use the stairs if you can. Park farther away from the gym. Don't you love those ladies and their very svelte bodies, and they're taking, you know, they sometimes have a chauffeur bringing them directly to the gym so they don't have to walk. Anyway, we need to keep moving. I do believe if you have one single health end for staying well longer, it is keep moving. Everything else I say is extraneous. Nice, but not nearly as essential. We were not meant to lie around. Now, you're certainly meant to relax, and I'll say something about that, but you're not meant to lie around. Now, why is it some people seem to do less exercise than other people and seem to have less weight? And one of my favorite, because I think I have this disease, is something called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So you're not doing anything that you or I would call exercise, but you're fidgeting. And you'll notice I'm fidgeting all the time. I don't stand still. And I have these round bottom shoes, so if I try to stand still, I'll fall right over. So that's another incentive. But I've always been a fidgeter. I had a girlfriend from China, and she and I used to go to the symphony together. And she would sit down and never uncross her legs. She would sit there perfectly still. She was a joy to sit with in the symphony. I was not. I was all over that chair. So it's not good to be a fidgeter, but not in the symphony. I think we should remember to stand up. Overweight people and people who have trouble keeping their weight off, sit down as soon as there's a chair. I tend to stand up, drive everybody crazy. Let's sit over here. No, I want to stand up in front of the computer all day. And walk, do not ride. That's one of the reasons why I love my bus. I ride the bus every day to and from, unless it's raining, and then I hit on my husband. E is for exercise. Again, this is a big trial, not such a new one, but it was a very large study, a huge number of adults who completed an exercise questionnaire and were followed for 5 years. And see, we epidemiologists like to know how many people died. We're kind of ghoulish like that. So they had a good number of deaths. And they found that the people who exercised 30+ minutes a day, 5+ days a week, and that would be brisk walking, for example, they had a 27% reduced risk of heart disease. That's about as good as statins. Vigorous exercise, which would be something like going to the gym or, you know, running or something, they had a 32% reduced risk, slightly better, maybe not enough better to spend much of your life in a gym. That's my prejudice. But if you did both of them, you had a 50% reduced risk. And the only thing I know that reduces women's risk of heart attack 50% compared to the appropriate comparison group is women who went to college compared to women who did not. A college education is fabulous. If you don't have it yet, it's not too late. It's really good for you. I don't know why. Maybe better lifestyle, maybe, I don't know. F is for family and friends, and this is one place where I think men and women are really different. I mean, we all have family and friends, but women have friends that are immediate, and we'll tell things to friends that our husbands wouldn't tell their best friend on the deathbed. I was on a plane once, and they announced that they were fixing something in the front of the plane, and we'd be delayed. So I sat down to talk to the woman next to me, who I didn't know, and she didn't know me. And I was admiring her clothes, and I was telling her where I was going, and she was telling me where she was going, and she was telling me about her divorce, and I was telling her about my husband, and we were telling each other about our kids. And then after an hour, the lady came and said, announced the plane was leaving. And then I said, oh, by the way, my name is such and so. And she said, oh, my name is such and so. And the man in front of us turned around and said, you mean you don't know each other? He could not conceive of that. So we are really good at getting social supports. There's a book called Just Friends, written by a psychologist in San Francisco. If you have not seen it, you should see it. She interviewed 100 non-randomly selected men and women, and she asked them, while she was with them, to contact their best friend. The man called up his best friend to play tennis. Tennis Tuesday, same time, same place, see you there. Big, great. And they hang up. The woman gets the bathroom repair job. She gets the kid who's having trouble in school job. She's getting whatever. And they've got a 30-minute conversation built into making the tennis date. We're just different. And I think that's good. G is for getaway, and that's obvious. You just get away. Do something you don't usually do. Do something that you've never done before. When we did the DPP, I was amazed at the number of people who were overweight, many of them not Caucasian, who had never been to the beach and never taken their kids to the beach. Didn't know what a farmer's market was. We took them out and about, and they had a really good time and kind of changed their whole family's lifestyle. But people who are working very hard hours, get home exhausted, you know, the next day they have to do all the kids' wash and make the brownies and figure out X, Y, and Z. They don't want to get out and do something until they do it. So we've been, most of us, very privileged to do that. So get away and keep doing it. H is for hormones. I don't usually say very much for hormones, and I think I won't say anything about this slide because the things that hormones are generally agreed to, if you're too old and you smoke, they will cause a stroke, whether if it's oral contraceptives or it's HRT. If you have high blood pressure or migraines, you may be at a higher risk of that. It does not prevent heart disease, as we learned in the WHI trials, but I will show you one new slide about all the stuff that's changed since the WHI trials, where finally the first one was reported in 2002, the next one was reported in 2004, and we thought we had the answer. Now it's, what, 10 years later? Not quite 10 years later, but a period of time later, and some of the things that have been found are very curious. We and Rancho Bernardo and about 6 other people have now published that women who have hot flashes have less heart disease. I don't have any idea what that is, but I thought at first, the first time we found it, we thought it was a fluke, and then other people began finding it too. You know, the best thing for your hot flashes is estrogen. Maybe that's why estrogen isn't good for you. I don't have any idea. It's an interesting thought. You've probably heard about the timing hypothesis, which says that hormone replacement therapy is good for women if they start it young, before they have any heart disease. That is a post hoc analysis. That's something that was not planned at the time of the trial. They fished through 172 comparisons, and that one popped out. And now there's a lot of evidence why it might be true, because if you're younger, when you take your hormones, you probably don't have any atherosclerosis. Your arteries are probably still pretty clear. And so maybe estrogen, which causes thrombosis and clotting, is bad for you when you have your heart problem has already progressed. So if you started it later, it might be bad for you. But if you're younger and you have a heart problem, it might be good for you. Well, that's very attractive as a mechanism. But I did another big trial with 10,000 women called the Ruth trial. And in the Ruth trial, everybody had diabetes and or atherosclerosis. And we saw exactly the same thing. Ruth was a test of an anti-estrogen. The anti-estrogen protected you against heart disease only in the youngest group, and they all had heart disease. That doesn't make sense. The explanation for the timing hypothesis in the estrogen-using women is kind of it was attractive until we got the Ruth data. The other stuff that's new is that the long-term, now longer follow-up clearly shows that if you had taken estrogen with a progesterone, which women who have a uterus do, you have an increased risk of breast cancer. And after you stop the estrogen, which most women in the trial did when they heard that it increased the risk of heart disease, you have an increased risk of breast cancer that does not go away and gets worse. So the curves separate like that. You have a permanent effect from having been randomized to estrogen for 5 to 7 years. So that's quite scary. Now that is for estrogen plus progesterone. That's what happens to women who have a uterus and have to take the combination. If you have had your uterus out, then you don't need to take the progesterone to protect your uterus, and you get unopposed estrogen. Those people don't have an increased risk of breast cancer. In fact, the new data suggests they may have a reduced risk of breast cancer. which looked to be already there when they stopped the trial, but it was not statistically significant. As time went on, those curves also separated, but in the good way. But before you get excited about taking estrogen without a progesterone, those people have an increased risk of ovarian cancer, and it's 4 times higher. Now, that's also getting bigger, the people on estrogen only, as time goes on. So it's very curious that you program this hormone memory in your body, and even when you stop it, you have these kind of long-term effects. There is no data that says that you should start it early and take it for a long time, and you will hear a lot of people say that. They picked out the piece of the data that they liked. Starting it early is good for that period of time. And then they picked out of the data the idea that if you started early you wouldn't get any problems, and they said you should take it forever. There's no data. So if you hear that from your doctor or anybody else, I would walk away. Now, the one good thing that both drugs, the estrogen alone and the estrogen with progestin, did was it prevented hip fractures in people who didn't even have osteoporosis. The women in this trial did not have osteoporosis. They were normal, healthy women. Well, some of them must have had it, but most of them did not. And it prevented hip fractures. It's a fabulous drug, and it's really cheap. So what's the matter with it for your bones? As soon as you stop it, that benefit goes away, and within 3 years, your bones look like you had never taken it. So that's the problem. That's the story. I think that I personally have said what I think about it. Some women who are miserable should have this drug, should take this drug. I would never tell a woman not to take it. It's she who's miserable, not me. But if you're not miserable, then I would think you might want to think about the risks and benefits. All right, so I is for Internet, and this is just a great source of information. You guys can Google anything you want. When my patients ask me questions which I usually can't answer anymore, I say, just Google that and let me know what you find out. And the only trick to Googling is that you want to see who's the sponsor of the site you found. So if you get a site and it says sponsored by your major pharmaceutical company that makes that drug, it might be a somewhat different recommendation than if it was sponsored by another group. So you just look, and if you get a sponsor, they're not necessarily wrong information either, but check somebody else's information. But I think you should be able to go, people like the people in this room who've obviously had educational opportunities in life, which should be able to Google most anything. J is for joy, optimism, and laughter. There was some of you may be old enough to remember Norm Cousins, who had a magazine called the Saturday Review. And he had some terrible disease that everybody didn't know what it was, but it was probably lupus, and they told him he was going to die. And he read somewhere that if he laughed enough, he wouldn't die. So he got a friend, he was quite well-to-do. He got a hotel room, I think, at the Ritz-Carlton, and he got a friend to bring him all the Charlie Chan movies that were ever made, or whatever kind of funny movies he liked, and he read only funny books, and he walked out of there a well man in about 4 months. Now, that's not a trial. I don't know what he had, but I do think there's something to being positive. And I read in the paper just the other day that the average baby laughs something like 60 times a day, and the average adult laughs 6 times a day. There's something wrong with that. So we really need to think about why it is that we can't just have a good old guffaw. And life is really fun. So it makes sense because a lot of the heart disease is inflammatory, and those are things that we think happiness affects. And so we look at, some people look at life as half full, and some people look at life as half empty. And this is the only cartoon you will see, but I love it. It says, what a lousy trip, it rained the whole time. All right, so these are the know your numbers, and I won't show these very long. If anybody doesn't know them, you can Google them. But there is a level now that's considered to be optimal. That's the best for your health. These numbers are pulled somewhat arbitrarily out of a committee's ear, but it's based on a lot of observational studies and some clinical trials. And then there's a number where it's high enough that your doctor would say you should have a medicine or radically change your lifestyle. And then if you have diabetes or heart disease or stroke already, then you have an even lower number. Your target number is even lower. So if you've got high blood pressure, and I would bet that 5 people in this room have high blood pressure, maybe more, it's so common, then your ideal blood pressure would be not greater than, well, you'd be treated if your blood pressure is 120 and or 80, so your ideal blood pressure is less than that. That's a pretty low blood pressure for an old person like me. But when I grew up, we thought that your ideal blood pressure was 100 plus your age. So my ideal blood pressure would have been 175, and that would have probably killed me, and doctors did not treat people for that blood pressure. And now we're smarter. So you need to get your blood pressure, your LDL, and your fasting blood sugar checked periodically. I'm not fanatic on how often you do it, but you certainly should do it. And if you have high blood pressure or diabetes in your family, you should probably do it more often. L is for love your partner. If you can find somebody to love, do it. It's a really good thing. Married men live longer. They know something. I'm sorry to say married women do really well after their spouses die usually, but that we're not talking about that. When I was giving this lecture when I was much younger, I brought home a study in Science magazine to my husband because I thought it was so interesting. And it talked about this man who did this experiment on rabbits. I think he had something like 5 or 10 rabbits in 2 groups. One of the rabbits were really well cared for. They had a nice cage, good food. Somebody took care of them and cleaned up their spot. But one of the sets of rabbits got taken out for about an hour 3 times a day, and they were petted and loved, and then they were put back in there. Otherwise, they were identical. It was a good life for the rabbits until they were sacrificed, and then they looked at their coronary arteries, and the rabbits who had been petted had no atherosclerosis, and the rabbits who had not been petted had a lot. I have to add that the rabbits had to be fed a very high cholesterol diet, because a regular rabbit diet, they don't get artery disease. So my husband thought that was such a great article. It was on the refrigerator door for about 5 years as a reminder. And when he was upset with me, he would say, "Stroke the rabbit." So that's kind of our little thing at home. But I think it is important to feel somebody that you care about more than yourself. It might not be a spouse, it might be a grandchild. It's impossible not to love your grandchild more than you love yourself. That's just love your partner if you can. I want to say one piece of bad news about this story about loving your partner. I can't resist. You may have read, it was the front page of USA Today, which if you stay in any hotels is what you read. And this had an article that said that just walking fast or having sex would raise your troponin level, which is a marker for heart ischemia, not getting enough oxygen to your heart. And it was the headline, "Sex and walking cause your heart to have not enough oxygen, cause heart damage." And then in the small print it said that if you had the same partner for 5 years, nothing happened. So it was very interesting that they showed that if you had a new partner, you were apt to have a lot of ischemia. But if you had the same old guy, it would be very nice, but it wouldn't cause any ischemia. They didn't comment on that about how far you had to walk. But we ladies were sitting around when we read the newspaper. We had a good laugh about that. You want to make your health your priority, and the women tend to have always something else to do, especially when they're younger. They've got a spouse, they've got kids, they've got grandkids. Pretty soon they get older, and then they got parents to take care of. Then you're trying to work because you didn't have time to work before. Now you're working more because you got none of those other things, and you're too busy. You're too busy to exercise. I mean, I'd like to get up every day and walk for an hour. My daughter-in-law is staying with me now, the one with the chocolate box, and so she and I try to get up and walk together for an hour while her baby's still sleeping. And it's wonderful. I wish I could do that every day, but I can't. And so anyway, we don't do that. We don't do that stuff. And you remember that you're responsible for all these people. If you don't do it, you're going to die. And then who's going to be responsible for all those people? So I think about that when I'm not taking good enough care of myself. I think, you've got all these other people sort of want you to be around for a while. I think they do. Okay, M is for the menopause. I'm not going to push anything. I do like this particular book, but I said I wouldn't advertise it. But there's a lot of other sources of information about the menopause. And again, this is something you can Google, and then you can talk to all your friends. Talking to your friends about the menopause is just like talking to your friends about childbirth. The experiences are totally different, but everybody has had an experience, and sometimes it's fun to exchange them. Never just means it's never too late to change. This was shown in several diet studies where you can start a healthy diet for the first time in your life at age 70, and it makes a difference. This is the omega-3, the fish oil story I was just telling you, and we do know from clinical trials that it reduces your triglycerides, a fat which is particularly bad for women and not for men. It raises your HDL. It seems to prevent heart disease. And to make these slides shorter, I didn't say may but it isn't, we don't have the trial data. So this is the other half of that vitamin D trial, the VITAL trial I was telling you about. So they're going to know vitamin D and omega-3, and I don't remember what the dose is for that. And that's the study that you may be asked to join in the mail one of these days and might want to do that. So P is for pets, and people with pets have been shown repeatedly to live longer. We did this in Rancho Bernardo. I think it was the first really bad question I asked. I've asked several bad questions, but I asked if they had a pet, and I didn't ask what it was. So I don't know whether they lived longer if they had a goldfish or if they had a dog. So I can't say whether or not it's because they had companionship or were walking or what. But next time I ask that question, I'll be smarter. But they did live longer. Questions. When you go to the doctor, if you're my age, you want to write down what it is you wanted to ask them. Make yourself a little note. You might keep a little pad someplace where I put things in a little pad by the bedside because I often have my best ideas just as I'm going to sleep, and they will never be retrieved again. But you could have another little pad or something. If there's something that you had been meaning to ask the doctor and you've been 3 times now and you never do it, you feel really stupid. So prioritize your questions. You can't ask him everything you want. And I write down the answers. I want to know exactly what he told me because I want to then see whether I agree with it. I do post-Google the doctor, but I also would like to remember it correctly. I got a medication where I had to take 3 pills once a week. And I was not competent to do that. That was a real challenge for me. I had put a little sign over the stove 3 times a week. It doesn't say 3 times what, but it's there. And so you just need to be sure that you get the prescription right. And then you not only need to know what your pills are, but you need to know what your partner's pills are. If the ambulance comes to your house because your partner has had a stroke and you have no idea what he's taking, you don't want to be in that situation. And if you're in a hotel where you don't have the medicine cabinet, you don't want to be in that situation. And sometimes that can be life-saving if the paramedics know what you and your partner are taking, if they need to come to your house. So please do know what they are, do write them down, and try to know what the other person you live with is taking as well. So relieving stress, you can do 2 things. One is relax. I'm really good at that. I can turn from really tiger, burning bright, so that nobody could be relaxed. If I wasn't relaxed, nobody else was going to be relaxed. Or I can be flaccid. I have been on planes where people turned to my husband and said, "Is she dead?" because I went to sleep so fast. And I also am not good at the other one, though. I cannot refuse. I wouldn't be here tonight if I was a normal human being. I'd be home having dinner with my family. But I get asked by somebody I really like, and here I am. And I'm having a good time now. I hope you are, too. All right. This is for my 3 big no's. Don't smoke. I'm sure you all know that. And now I'm so annoyed. I used to be a smoker. My generation were pretty much all smokers. But I can't even stand to be around who smells faintly of smoke. And when I get into a taxi and it's a bit smoky, I get right out. So I think we've could have sort of changed our behavior about that. Don't smoke. Don't salt. Almost everything you eat is almost as good without salt. And for those things that don't, you can find other spices. And don't drink sweetened drinks. Sweetened drinks do tell your brain that it's been full. Then the brain realizes it's been faked and now it's hungry again and it wants something else. So you don't want to stay away from the sweetened drinks. I'm not a fan of diet sodas, but I'm not a soda person, so I suppose if you're a soda person, that's better than the soda with a syrup in it. But I think in the main, there are a lot of good things to drink. I asked somebody who was a really, really good doctor, much smarter than I am, the one question. I have a burning question for anybody I see in a meeting. So this guy was talking about something about not sweet drinking, what you should not drink. And I said, why are all the women in my town walking around with a big bottle of water? Everybody I know has got a big bottle of water, and they're convinced that it will prevent wrinkles, which I think is an interesting idea. You have to be really hyperhydrated to have that work. But at any rate, they're all doing it, and they all say that the doctor told them they should have 8 glasses of water a day. So I said, is that true? Do I need 8 glasses of water a day? And he said, no. There's no evidence that you need to drink any water unless you're thirsty or unless you're too old to know you're dehydrated. So normal, healthy people don't need any water till they're thirsty. Well, I haven't been able to persuade anybody that's true. But I'm sort of like Paul Newman when somebody asked him when he was at a table and the waiter came and said, what kind of water do you like? You know, sparkling, still, or something else. And he said, water hasn't crossed my lips in 16 years. Well, we all know that he drank a lot of beer. Well, I don't drink a lot of beer, but I could go a long time without drinking water. So I think that's an interesting, that water business, and it's particularly fascinating now because you probably know as you lift the glass to your lips that water is in a bottle which contains a bad toxin which is bad for you. And so you should, if you're going to drink water all day long, then you should put it in glass, not in a plastic bottle. All right, that's probably more preaching than you wanted. I'll say a few words about trans fats, and then I'll say one good thing about trans fats that I just learned last week. So we all know what trans fats are. That's what we do to the margarine to make it look like butter in World War II when we couldn't get any, and then we were convinced that margarine was good for you. And it's mainly in baked goods and French fries. And then we're told about saturated fat, which is mainly from four-legged meat. I love it when I go to the grocery store and I see on the avocado no cholesterol. There never was any cholesterol in a fruit or vegetable, but they're selling it like this is a really good avocado because it doesn't have any cholesterol. You know, at any rate, I want to say that there is a good trans fat, and I'm so happy with this information. I don't know whether it's healthy or not, but it's definitely true. I found out a few days ago when I was getting ready for this talk, and I felt I had to find some new things that everybody hadn't heard before, that the animal that chews its cud, the cow, which is the main source of milk that we drink from an animal that chews its cud, makes a different trans fat from all the other sources. And apparently this trans fat does not raise your cholesterol or change any of the bad things. And it may be the reason why those French ladies and men can eat all those soft, gummy, 100% fat cheeses that we avoid and drink the boring old other cheeses, and they don't have heart disease. It may not be the red wine. It's quite an interesting idea. Anyway, when I find something that I really like and somebody thinks it might be good for me, I tend to kind of latch on to that. And I really do like strong, gooey cheeses, which are usually made of 100% fat milk. So maybe just possibly that's not as bad for you as you thought. I'm not recommending it, mind you. I'm just saying that maybe you could be a little more flexible about the kind of cheese you eat if you like cheese. I think that's exciting, a new option. It'll be right up there with dark chocolate if it works out. So you help your family. We usually control the family diet. We do the shopping. We pick out the food. And we usually know the family medical history. So we're the ones who, in a pinch, are usually there trying to keep people healthy or taking care of them when we're not. So just remember that that's your assigned task. They may have evened out almost all the other duties, but that one remains ours. We did a study in Rancho Bernardo and we wanted to know whether small babies, people who were small babies, had more heart disease when they were older. So we asked everybody what their birth weight was, and then we asked them to document that. And you know, the women had their baby books or the Bible or whatever they documented on a birth certificate. Not any men knew their birth weight. They had no clue. So we could only talk about the women, but the women who were small for age had a worse prognosis later on in life with cardiovascular disease. The body was programmed differently because they weren't getting enough nutrition inside the body. They were a small baby. Not every small baby has this reason, but it's a common one. It was a small baby, and then they grew up and had more calories in their body, had been trained to accept, and those calories went to fat. Well, I'm about done because I'm getting to the end of the vegetables and the V's. So you know that you're supposed to eat at least 5 different colors a day. That's always fun. I like to do the rainbow shopping. I like to say a word about lycopene, which is a better antioxidant than beta-carotene, and it only comes in tomatoes, and it only can be absorbed to a reasonable amount if your tomatoes are cooked, and it isn't absorbed if it isn't eaten with fat, which makes pizza a health food. So I like that recommendation. And then potassium is a simple source of potassium is bananas. This is my favorite food serving, you know, these food pyramids. I like this one particularly well because it tells you that a serving size of meat is 1 deck of cards. It's very easy to remember, and it's very easy to figure out just how much too much you ate at any given meal. Then you've got the sweets at the top, 75 calories a day. That's like 2 of those really good chocolates in the medicine box. And then fats, 3 to 5 servings a day. But you notice the fats they have are things like nuts, which are actually quite healthy. Protein that they show here is non-fat milk, some beans, and some fish. Then your carbs, that's the amount there. And then they say fruits unlimited at least 3 servings and veg unlimited at least 4 servings. And now, at least the people who work with diabetes people are saying maybe we should limit a little bit the fruits, because a lot of the fruits are full of natural sugar, but there is a lot of sugar there. So they recommend if you want your fruit, maybe you should eat it when it's not juiced, and then you'll get the fiber with the fruit. I happen to like all kinds of fruits and vegetables, so that's not a challenge for me. But a lot of people, when you have them to your house and you make fabulous broccoli, you notice there's a lot left over. So the W's are wine, walking, and weights. Wine in moderation is certainly good. I have no idea how it works. It may not have to be red. It seems that maybe it's better to drink wine and hard liquor than to drink beer, but that data's a little bit funny. And I talked about how much you have to walk, and I do think that lifting weights, women don't have very good upper body strength. Very few of us look like the president's wife. Nobody will ever see my upper arms again, I can assure you. So, but I have by my telephone a 5-pound weight. And I do a lot of conference calls, and I'm on the speakerphone. So I'm in there doing this, and after a while I'm doing heavy breathing, and everybody's wondering what I'm doing, but I'm not having any fun. I'm just lifting weights. But you can probably find, if you're a telephone person and you have a speakerphone, you can probably find, if you leave those weights right by a phone, you'd be surprised how easy it is to do it. Syndrome X is this metabolic syndrome, all these funny things that are bad if you have diabetes or if you're overweight or if you're at risk for diabetes. It's a combination of high triglycerides and low HDL and a big waist girth. Both men and women get a bigger waist girth as they get older. It's called male pattern obesity, but it also occurs in women. And if you have 3 of these factors, then your doctor knows it. Then he will treat you to the level of those risk factors I showed before that were for people with diabetes, because you are at increased risk even if you don't have diabetes. Yoga is I'm a big believer in inner peace. I'm not very good at practicing inner peace, but I think, so we're doing a trial now, a yoga trial of restoration yoga or stretching, where people who are overweight, I don't see any candidates in this room, or I'd be out talking to you about joining, but you have to be quite overweight and very sedentary to get in. And then we're having them either stretch, which is also good for you, or do restoration yoga. And in 6 months we will know whether or not this prevented all the risk factors associated with diabetes. In our pilot study, it did. This is a bigger study. So that's kind of fun. And that's the place you can call if you have a fat friend. And then Z, my last slide, is for sleep. And there's this whole debate about, I think when I see patients, most of my patients are people I meet at cocktail parties now, but they all Zoom over to me and ask me their favorite question. And people want to know, I can't sleep at all. I'm up all night. I never sleep at night. Well, people do sleep, or they're very, very sick. I think not many people manage to stay up all night for more than 3 days without being seriously ill. So normal sleep duration is probably around 7 to 8 hours. Less than that is not good. More than that is not good. And that's something your body, you can't train your body. And you may notice, if you've gotten older, that amount of sleep you need changes, or your whole sleep pattern changes. But the main point is to get some consistent sleep during the night. And if you nap all day, which a lot of older people do when they're bored or don't have anybody to talk to, or the television's just so bad it puts them right under, then they will not be able to sleep at night because they've already had their quota. There are studies that show that a half an hour nap, or maybe even an hour nap, the studies are stronger, but a half an hour nap is good for you. It's not enough to replace your evening sleep, and it seems to be, in older people especially, it seems to be very rejuvenating. I try to do at least 1 half-an-hour nap on the weekend. That's the only chance I have to do it. And it does make me feel good. It's just like getting up and walking 5 miles. Not the same effect, but the same feel-good effect. If you sleep with someone who snores, or you yourself snore, and you snore in a pattern which I will not illustrate, but it's a snort. So the other person either wakes themselves up or wakes you up. That person may very well have sleep apnea. And sleep apnea is a very common and treatable cause of memory loss and other cognitive failure. So that's something to think about. And then obesity is the main risk factor for sleep apnea. So I'm going to show you my favorites. Now you should pick out your favorites. These are my personal favorites on the list of things that I think would be good for me. So, and I don't do them all, so don't misunderstand me. I should exercise more, I should eat more often, but eat less more often, and read the labels. I'm good at reading the labels. I should eat better, a little of everything, and I still believe that. My mother told me, eat a little bit of everything on your plate, because you don't know what's in there that would be good for you that we don't know about. That's still true. So taste a little bit of everything. Minerals, herbs, nutrients. Fortunately, there's several things like curcumin and another spice that's in Indian food that are really supposed to be good for everything. So you like Indian food, that's marvelous. I overeat that on the grounds that I'm making up for the fact I don't get it every day. And then I said unlimited fruits and vegetables. Know your risk factors. Know whether you have a cluster of risk factors. Know whether you have a family history of something. You're at quite a different risk if your mom and dad had something, especially if they weren't 85 when they got it. If they got it in their 40s and 50s, then you likely may be at higher risk. Take medicines if they're needed, and keep the good lifestyle. Some people take the medicine and then they think, well, I'm taking statins, I don't have to exercise anymore. Or I'm taking statins, I can have a 10-pound steak. Once in a while, you can take a day off from exercising. Once in a while, you can have a 10-pound steak. But as everyday life, you may have to take a pill and a lifestyle. So don't think taking the pill means the lifestyle doesn't matter. I've already said what I think about vitamin D from sunshine, and my last 2 R's are relax and refuse. So thank you very much. And I'd be glad to answer questions about it. We may be overdue because I said too much. Not too bad. Yes? The question was whether I said coffee was good for the memory for older women and not so good for younger women. You know, I wrote at least 400 papers in which I referred to old women as people over 65. And I'm going to rewrite those papers in my old age because I obviously don't think of that anymore. So I can't answer that question, but I would imagine it was 65 and older. The traditional definition of old is 65. As you get older, it changes. We now have a young old and a middle-aged old and an old old. And people are not there necessarily their chronological age either. We all know people who are incredibly young and find out with a start that they're in their 90s. So I think we are more individual, we like to think, but I can't directly answer that question because I can't remember the paper, how it defined it. Well, I actually have a fact. You've gotten a lot of viewpoints. I actually have a fact. I think I've overdosed you on viewpoints, but I have a fact. The amount of calories provided by fructose and glucose, which is what we used to use, are the same. They're not more fattening and they're not worse for you. That's just too much sugar. And we use corn because it's cheaper. It's much cheaper to grow corn than it is to grow sugarcane. That's all there is to it. Well, the big surge in obesity and type 2 diabetes is due to the fact that we became more sedentary and ate more food, that we didn't even have to cook ourselves, and that various fast food companies convinced us, who were all raised to save money, that we could get a giant French fries for only 10 cents more and a giant Coke for only 20 cents more. So we were, you know, raised to be, my parents were products of the Great Depression, and that was a bargain. It's just not a bargain when it's on your body. So I do think that, I do agree with the people who say sweetened drinks were a big deal. You know, when I'm not old enough to remember when the Coke was that high, but I'm old enough to remember when the Coke was that high, and now you can hardly find a Coke that's that size anymore. So I think it was quantity. Yep.
Breast cancer?
The study suggested that the women who could take estrogen only because they had no uterus. That's not a cause and effect. You don't take estrogen without a progesterone if you have a uterus, because then you get uterine cancer. We knew that. So we gave the women in the trials that I participated in, if they had no uterus, then they could take the estrogen alone. There was no reason to take the progestin. So those women got estrogen alone, and they had less breast cancer and more ovarian cancer.
But if you have no ovaries either?
Well, if you have no ovaries, then it's going to be a problem. You won't get ovarian cancer. But not every woman has no ovaries, and not every woman knows whether they have ovaries. I mean, in some older women were told, or not even talked to by their doctor about whether the ovaries were coming or going. They don't even know it. We tried to validate reported oophorectomy in Rancho Bernardo, and I think there were about 30% who had no idea. One doctor was told, the wife's doctor told the husband, "We're leaving the playroom but taking out the nursery." That's all he said. Amazing. So, did I answer your question?
Well, not exactly.
Okay, well, I'll try again.
No ovaries and no uterus.
Yes.
In a middle-aged woman.
Yeah, and then you would not have to worry about ovarian cancer, and it might reduce your risk of breast cancer. It will increase your risk of stroke. We know that. So, you know, let's pick your poison. Every medicine you take, even aspirin, has a side effect. When you go through the menopause, your LDL levels go up. It's a pretty good marker for when you're, so.
But the HRT would stop that.
The HRT benefit also goes down, but the HRT benefit, unlike the LDL benefit, which is physiologic and normal, the HDL benefit is not physiologic. It's only because you're taking estrogen by mouth. It goes through your liver, and your liver makes HDL. If you take estrogen on a patch, which does not go through your liver, which is probably the preferred way to take it because it doesn't cause as many blood clots, and it may not cause as many strokes. There's some data that suggests that's true. So if you take it that way, it won't do anything for you. HDL, because the HDL effect was all fake. It was an effect by taking the pill that went to your liver first. So you not only have to think about what drug, but what route it is. But most people think if you're going to take estrogen, you have a reason to take it. I say the mantra, take it as little as works for whatever reason you're taking it. But I'm not sure that I take estrogen to prevent anything. It certainly won't have a lasting effect for your bones. I don't think it will prevent heart disease in most people. And there is a risk of stroke and pulmonary embolus. Well, I said that I said that there are 5, or I think now 6 studies where now this is not a trial, they just looked at people who had reported by history bad hot flashes, or in our cohort, not hot flashes, but night sweats, which is a marker for having really bad hot flashes. And those people seem to have more heart disease later on. I don't know if that's cause and effect, or that's something else which is happening that is determining that they get more hot flashes, but it is an observation, just an observation. Well, I'm sure that's true. Well, cod liver oil is what most of the people in the generation before us got to prevent rickets. And it actually in Scandinavia, I did some research in Norway, and they found out that the giving of a mother to the child of cod liver oil was a marker for a good mother. They correlated all the things that were good mothers, and mothers who failed to give their kids cod liver oil were not good mothers. It was sort of like not having cigarettes in the house. It was quite interesting. So most of the fish oil now is not cod liver oil, which I only took once and refused it thereafter. But there are several kinds of oil, and they come in capsules, and people find the one that they think has the less regurgitated taste or flavor. I mean, I've not used this, but I gather that one of the objections is that you have a kind of a oily or fishy aftertaste, and different people swear by different ones. I personally prefer to eat the fish. But the problem with eating the fish, as you know, is that the fish that has the most omega-3 is the wild salmon, which costs $12.98 a pound compared to $4 for the farm salmon. And then there's the other problem with eating too much. I didn't mean to mention this because this is something new that I just also learned this week. You can't eat too much fish. So not only is it bad that we're fishing out the oceans, but there is a study, there's 5 trials that compared 5 servings of fish a week with none. And they all showed that was better. But interestingly enough, there was a study just published from Japan which compared eating 1 serving of fish a week with more. And 1 serving was better. So I think that there may be some nuances to overeating the things that are good for us. I mean, I also think we're fishing out the ocean, so I'm not pushing people to eat a lot of fish. But it may be, maybe the Japanese diet has so much of other good things in it, they don't need that extra fish. Maybe that doesn't apply to us. But it was an interesting study. And the original trial, I think the original large trial, which was published in The Lancet many years ago, I think they did have 2 servings of fish a week, and it was done in England, where people had at that time a really unhealthy diet, and there was a significantly better experience in the people who had fish twice a week. I think that might be, time is up. Thank you.